All right, Mark Rogers TV back with you to talk college football, and the absolute best source for college football coast to coast is the guy that we've got on the line right now. It's been a while, Joe. Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe, how you doing tonight?
I can't wait, Mark. A long off season of college football, but we're about 2 months away. Can't wait for the start of the season.
I know, Joe. If you follow the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, any of these other sports, it's like the off season's it seems like it's about 36 hours and they're back at it. But with college football, seems like we haven't seen college football forever. It's been since the second week of January when Clemson, of course, won the national championship over Alabama. It's about this time of year that we can think forward. We can look at the schedules. We can project based on some of the disappointments from last season. And even though the SEC showed itself again on National Signing Day to be bringing in the best talent, also showing to be sending the best talent to the NFL draft, to the SEC, very dominant on both sides, there's a number of coaches that aren't necessarily feeling comfortable and could potentially be on the hot seat based on some disappointments over the last few years. So let's run down some coaches in the SEC. You've got Butch Jones at Tennessee. Okay, he brings in 3 or 4 consecutive top 15 recruiting classes. He brings it from a program that was 5-7 prior to him getting there. They go to 7-6. They win 3 consecutive bowl games. They've gone 9-4 the last 2 years, but Florida continues to push them aside to win the SEC Eastern Division. So Tennessee fans have to be a little disgruntled. They thought they had the team last year that would get it done, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing team in Tennessee. I mean, expectations are high each and every year. They brought back 17 returning starters last year, and they were the darlings to win the SEC East, and they finished 9-4 overall. Defensively, this defense was atrocious in run support last year. They gave up 212 rushing yards per game. That was with Derek Barnett and Jalen Reeves-Maben. You're talking about a defensive unit, Mark, at the end of the season that allowed over 400 rushing yards to Missouri and over 400 rushing yards to Kentucky. I mean, they won both of those ball games, but they lose Maben, they lose Derek Barnett, their all-time sack leader. And you're talking about an offense now that starts the year without Josh Dobbs, without Alvin Kamara, without Jalen Hurd, and without Josh Malone. And you look at the better teams now in the SEC East that have solidified quarterbacks entering the 2017 season. Jacob Eason, you have Drew Lock with Missouri, Jake Bentley with South Carolina. I mean, this is a loaded conference. I just don't think it's going to be a very productive season for Butch Jones. I actually have the Volunteers projected at 6-6 overall. I just think teams like Vanderbilt are getting better. This was a Vanderbilt team that knocked off Tennessee last year by 11 points. They traveled to Knoxville, but again, look at all the players that are going to be missed from that lineup. I think it's going to be a long 2017 season for Butch Jones, and unfortunately, I think he'll be out of a job by the end of the year.
Georgia's very intriguing to me with Jacob Eason coming back at quarterback. I know that he was not stellar as a freshman, but there's usually that leap from the freshman season to the second year. And then with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb back in the backfield for Georgia, maybe the Bulldogs are going to benefit from those guys not exploding and moving on to the NFL as many expected a few years ago. And the defense, I believe, has 9 starters coming back. So Georgia, keep an eye out with another great recruiting class coming in under Kirby Smart. We go to the Western Division, and I don't think there's a coincidence here, Joe, that we've got 3 teams with coaches on the hot seat because Alabama has so much dominated this division where for Nick Saban, about the first half of his tenure, there was always an LSU and Auburn, somebody right there that was close, right on the heels or even better than Alabama. But over the last 4 or 5 years, take away a kick 6 in 2013, and Alabama has completely dominated the division, and it's no coincidence that Les Miles is without a job because of it. Now, right now, we've got Texas A&M, Arkansas, and we've got Auburn all chasing Bama. Let's start with Auburn being the rival and being a team that most recently knocked off Alabama and went to the national championship game in 2013. Yeah. Gus Malzahn brings back the Tigers. They looked really strong the first 7 or 8 weeks, surprisingly last year, but really faded down the stretch. What do you think of the Tigers' chances this year?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an uphill battle. I know this is another team that the media loves in terms of Jarrett Stidham comes over. He's going to be the answer to take the Auburn Tigers to the promised land and challenge Alabama in the SEC West this year. The one problem that Auburn's had over the last few years, Mark, they have one game in which they passed for over 300 yards in the last 26 games. It was in 2015 in the loss to Chad Kelly and Ole Miss. You look at Auburn's offense, since they made it to the national championship game in 2013, they averaged that year 328 rushing yards per game. The second year under Nick Marshall, they rushed for 255 yards per game. In 2015, they dipped all the way down to 196 yards, rushing yards per game, but in their 6 losses, they averaged 158 yards on the ground. Last year with Petaway and Kerryon Johnson, they were back up to 271 rushing yards per game. That's why they had a fast start. But their inability to stretch teams vertically really was their Achilles heel, especially in the Sugar Bowl loss to Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma. Now you're going to ask this offense again that just got back on track from a rushing standpoint to really now balance it out with Jarrett Stidham from Baylor. The problem with Jarrett Stidham is he's a timing quarterback. Baylor is a spread offense attack. They work on a 4-step drop where he had to make his reads and progressions very, very quickly. Even though Auburn runs a spread offense, it's not based off the same type of philosophy that they had with Art Briles and Baylor. So asking Jarrett Stidham to make the transition, again, he's not a mobile quarterback. He can move outside the pocket, but he's not like a Nick Marshall type. He doesn't have great athleticism. I think it's going to be a long year, coupled with the fact of the defensive losses. They lose Montravius Adams and Carl Lawson to that defensive front. It's going to be a big task for the Auburn Tigers in the 2017 season.
Folks, if you want to check out one of the most dominant rushing attacks in college football history, go back to maybe collegefootballreference.com. Look up the 2013 Auburn Tigers. Joe referenced it right there. Just don't consider that Air Force and Army rushed for that type of yardage. Consider the schedule. It was brutal. And that team with Nick Marshall running the show, say what you will about his passing of the football, he ran that thing to a T, and they had a great offensive line, Trey Mason in the backfield, and I can't think of the fullback's name right now. They had an excellent blocking fullback that I can't come up with his name right now, but Auburn was just a legit, ran for over 500 yards in a number of games against top-quality competition. Brett Bielema takes over at Arkansas, has a rough start, but most people expected that because he had to overhaul the roster. The team took off 3 consecutive years and added wins to the win total and really took off against the SEC West, had a 5-3 campaign a couple years ago in the SEC. But maybe they've hit a ceiling. Your thoughts about Arkansas coming into 2017?
Yeah, I think there's pressure on Brett Bielema this year. I think he's got one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC in Austin Allen. I think the problem with Arkansas overall is twofold. You look at their losses last year, they had 6 of them, got blown out by Texas A&M, got blown out by Alabama, got blown out by LSU, got blown out by Auburn. I mean, really did not play well against the other teams within the SEC West. And you're talking about a coach that lost 2 double-digit halftime leads at the end of the year to both Missouri and Virginia Tech in the bowl game. I mean, you're talking about a team that led Missouri 24-7 at the half to lose that ball game 28-24, and then had a 24-0 halftime lead in the Belt Bowl to see them lose 35-24 the way they did to end the 2016 season. I don't think there's any way you can't say Brett Bielema is on the hot seat, especially after the early success that he had in his first couple of years there, in terms of after he finally broke through with an SEC victory. A lot of expectations on that team in 2015. They sort of looked like they were going in the right direction, and then they take a step back last year in 2016. I think there's no way that Brett Bielema is not on the hot seat, especially when you look at the success of some of the other teams in the SEC West, obviously like Alabama, the success of LSU with Ed Orgeron last year, and now the pressure on Auburn and Gus Malzahn, and the pressure on Kevin Sumlin. The pressure's got to be on Brett Bielema as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought that they had taken major strides when Bielema knocked off Ole Miss and LSU at the end of the season, in which they beat Texas in the Texas Bowl and finished 7-6, and then they come back the next year. And I had mentioned the 5-3 finish in the SEC, and despite some early losses, including Toledo, they really rallied, looked strong, won another bowl game against Kansas State, and then last year. What speaks to me, when you lose a double-digit lead, or like you said, a 17-point lead against Mizzou, and then especially against Mizzou, you cannot contend in the SEC West and be losing games to Missouri. Then after that, in the Belk Bowl against Virginia Tech, that speaks coaching issues. When you can't hold on to 3 and 4 touchdown leads against, in one case, inferior competition, that's a huge issue. And Arkansas inherently has an issue competing in the SEC Western Division because they've got to go out of state for most of their best players. Unlike Texas A&M, Alabama, even Mississippi has great talent, just not great numbers of players because of the limited population. But everybody else can stay in state and attract great football players. Very few great football players playing high school football in Arkansas, and that's sometimes an issue. Kevin Sumlin with Johnny Manziel forged a scare into Alabama and to others in the SEC West when they arrived on the scene from the Big 12. Knocked off Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl that first season, had 2 very productive seasons with Johnny Manziel. Kevin Sumlin was the chic coach in college football, bringing in top 5 recruiting classes. Now, 3 consecutive 8-5 campaigns. They get off to hot starts, aided by a weak non-conference schedule. And then they just get hammered down the stretch. And Texas A&M loses another bowl game against a Kansas State team that you would think that they had much more talent than this past bowl campaign. So your thoughts about Kevin Sumlin now?
Yeah, I think he's on the hot seat again. I mean, obviously last year to be in the first, week of college football playoff standings, you would think that this team was 7-1 after they beat New Mexico State after their loss to Alabama. So they were still on the outside looking in, but they still had a possibility if they would have won out at the end of the year to be in the college football playoff. And they laid an egg at the end of the year. They lost to Mississippi State. They lost to LSU. They lost to Kansas State. I mean, Kansas State game was really a mind-boggling game because from a speed perspective, they had the offensive playmakers to really exploit that Kansas State defense, and they could not do it. Again, now you're going to lose Deshaun Hall. You lose Myles Garrett. Both of those players accounted for 13 total sacks in 2016. They lose Gerard Evans, their big play safety. And you lose your starting quarterback in Trevor Knight. Again, a mobile quarterback. And both of those guys that are battling it out now, Kellen Mond and Hubenak, yeah, whoever gets the nod there is not going to be the same type of experienced quarterback in terms of big game experience that Trevor Knight was. So where is this team heading into 2017? I mean, they're going to have an identity, especially from an offensive perspective. They lose Ricky Seals-Jones. They lose Josh Reynolds. All the pressure now falls on Christian Kirk. I mean, they have Travion Williams and Keith Ford. I really think they're going to have to run the football early part of the season to build an identity. I don't think they can go like they did last year with the wide open 5 wide receiver sets that they utilized, because I just don't think they have the playmakers to play that style of offense, and more importantly, defensively in some run support. This is a defense that gave up 191 rushing yards per game last year and could not shut down the run effectively. I think it's going to be a long year. I think they're a 500 team, preseason projection. And again, when you look at their offense, when they had success and they started the year 6-0, they were rushing well over 200 yards per game. They were 2-5 the rest of the way in their 8 games down the stretch. They could not run the football consistently. They were 70 or 80 yards well under that average in the first part of the season, and that's why they finished 2-5 to end the year.
Kevin Sumlin's in the habit of recruiting and signing 5-star quarterbacks. Unfortunately, he's also in the habit of losing them to other programs. It seems like forever ago that he signed Kyler Murray and then lost him. And it's going to be interesting because Baker Mayfield's vying for a Heisman Trophy most likely this year, but next year most likely the starting quarterback at Oklahoma is going to be one Kyler Murray here years after he was brought to College Station. Texas A&M, needs to show up and show out. They lost maybe that window of credibility and being the hot commodity in college football, and everyone riding that Johnny Manziel train, and Kevin Sumlin didn't take advantage of it after those first couple double-digit seasons of wins. I'd like to take you around a couple conferences real quick, Joe. We've got all summer to talk college football and get set for the regular season. I'm intrigued by really every conference, but in particular the Big Ten. We've got a situation where Penn State came out of nowhere, surprised most of us in winning the Big Ten championship. Ohio State would by far have the best talent. The Eastern Division is loaded. We've got Michigan State. It'll be very intriguing to see if they can bounce back from 3-9. And Michigan loses 18 seniors to the NFL, most of them to the NFL. Your thoughts about an early forecast on where the Big Ten stands?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mediocre conference from top to bottom. I really do. I think when you look at some of the teams there, I mean, Penn State, in my opinion, is the clear-cut favorite in that division in the North, over Ohio State, over Michigan, believe it or not. I do have a sleeper with Northwestern. I think Northwestern shocks everybody this year because of their quarterback, Clayton Thorson, and their running back, Justin Jackson. Just really like what Pat Fitzgerald has done there. And you look at some of their losses last year, played Ohio State tooth and nail, lost that ball game 24-20. Again, I think Ohio State takes a step back this year. A couple of factors why. I think when you look at Ohio State, obviously the defensive losses of Raekwon McMillan, Malik Hooker, Lattimore, and Conley are going to be huge losses to that defense. Again, I didn't think they were a dominant defense like they were in years past in 2014, especially when they made the national championship run. Again, I know they only allowed 15 points per game, but I don't think they were as dominant as many people thought they were. The other thing is you look at the way Clemson exploited that defense in the playoff game. I mean, that's one of Urban Meyer's worst losses in recent years. I almost call it like the Mike Tyson effect. How is Ohio State going to really bounce back from the residual effects of being knocked out by the Clemson Tigers? You look at Michigan State in 2015. They made it to the playoff, got shut out by Alabama, lost a ton of talent, and they went 3-9 the following season. I have Ohio State projected at 8-4 overall. Again, and they're still above 500. But I do think they struggle in the 2017 season because of the losses on the defensive side of the ball, coupled with the fact of I really think that Clemson exploited that defense from a speed perspective.
Joe, you think Ohio State's going to go 8-4. So they're losing to Michigan, Oklahoma. They've got Nebraska on the schedule. They've got to go to Lincoln, and they lose to Penn State, I guess.
Yeah, I have one in there. I think they could lose to Michigan State. So, I mean, the three losses that I have them, lost definite, in my opinion, for the 2017 season were obviously Michigan, was Penn State, and was Oklahoma. I think the other losses could be sprinkled in. Obviously, the other loss could be a Michigan State loss, even though Michigan State travels to Ohio State. It could be Nebraska. Again, I think they have another loss in there as well. Where it comes from exactly, I'm not sure. I just think it'll be sprinkled in there by one of those teams that you mentioned. And Nebraska is another team that obviously, can strike an upset here and there. So don't count out the Cornhuskers.
So I think you hit on one of the unheralded quarterback-running back combinations in college football. Clayton Thorson started as a freshman 2 years ago in leading the Wildcats to 10-2 in the regular season, but really struggled in the passing game. But credit the kid. He persevered, didn't have many weapons on the outside, really threatened the defense more on the ground than through the air, really developed as a passer last season. And Justin Jackson's a kid that's run for about 1,400 yards 3 consecutive years. A few people would know about that. And they go to a bowl game against Pitt and defeat a Panthers team last year that, of course, beat Clemson at one point. So Northwestern, you mentioned the game in Columbus, 24-20. They played a lot of excellent teams, extremely close, Wisconsin included, and Northwestern, the Big Ten West is just built with no dominant teams where you've got Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Northwestern. It will be extremely interesting to see who comes out of that mess of teams.
Yeah, I mean, again, Wisconsin, I think Paul Chryst did a great job last year with Hornibrook. They got back to running the football consistently. The one thing about Wisconsin overall is that in 2015, they dipped down to 150 rushing yards per game. In 2014, they averaged, 283 yards per game. In 2013, they were up around 320 or vice versa with Melvin Gordon there. And then they dripped down in 2015 to 150. Clement was banged up for much of the year. They got back to running the football consistently. I think the one thing when you look at Wisconsin overall this year, obviously Alex Hornibrook is going to be the guy. There's no longer Bart Houston there to back him up. So all the pressure falls on Alex Hornibrook. They lose some offensive linemen like Gramsick to the NFL draft this year. How's that going to affect the continuity? And again, I think defensively, you look at the two big losses to that defense, Vince Beagle and TJ Watt. Yeah, statistically, they did a great job in terms of scoring defense and in run support. But those are huge losses on the defensive side of the ball. And even though they're recruiting top 20 talent each and every year, from a team chemistry perspective, that's where I see the biggest loss. Again, I think Paul Chryst has done a great job. I just don't think Wisconsin's going to sneak up on people the way they did in 2016, and I expect some of the other teams within the conference to find other positions. So I think the conference as a whole will be more competitive.
We are 3 months away from the opening of football camps across the country the first week of August, so you need to get set for college football season and stuff your brain full of information, and the best way to do so is to check out Joe Lisi's college football preview for 2017. Joe, you got to let us know what is in this 654 pages. I believe I've got the number of pages right. 657 pages full of content
on an ebook platform, Mark. It's got my surprising players for the 2017 season. It has coaches on the hot seat like we mentioned. It's got conference projections for the end of the year. It's got my conference previews as well. It's got every Power 5 team broken down statistically, strengths and weaknesses in terms of rushing and passing, where the teams broke down in the 2016 season. Doesn't concentrate a lot on position battles. To me, we'll know about those in August. I really wanted to concentrate on where these teams were strong and weak in the 2016 season, because ultimately when you preview the year, we're going to know where these teams are after the first couple of games. I want to see if those strengths and weaknesses play out. By week number 3, it's a new season already. You could throw the preview out. We'll be prognosticating the upcoming year, but usually in the first couple of games is where you see if those strengths and weaknesses from the previous year played out, and that's the most important thing to me. If you want stats, you want information, it's in this preview.
Joe Lisi, goforthe2.com. Please join him there for all your college football content, in addition to what you find here on Mark Rogers TV, and also follow him on Twitter at goforthe2. And if you're in particular parts of the country, Joe, I would like to have the people be understanding of where they can catch you on radio and television and otherwise.
Yeah, they could follow me during the college football season. I'm on Friday nights for a 2-hour special, 720 KDAWN in Los Angeles. Every Saturday morning throughout the college football season, 10 to 12, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., SB Nation Radio and Fantasy Sports Radio Network. And I do weekly spots in ESPN Baton Rouge and Jackson, Mississippi. 4-5 Baton Rouge with Matt Moscana and Jake Wimberly out in Jackson, Mississippi, 105.9. Great guys, and I love talking about college football, Mark.
This guy does talk more college football than anyone I know, and intelligently. So for real hardcore football fans, and we like to say, Joe, that here at Mark Rogers TV, we are serious about college football. This is where the serious college football fans come to play. Joe Lisi is your guy. Goforthe2.com and follow him on Twitter at goforthe2. Joe, it's always a great conversation.
Anytime, Mark. Love the show.